From Martina so far in this first set. First serve really hasn't worked up to its usual high standard. What cost her that other serve?
Sobrang di ko pa mapaniwala. Maraming salamat sa suporta. Sana patuloy yung suporta niyo sa akin.
I think for United States, especially the juniors, I think it's a great opportunity to be exposed to this level. And this
best moment, I think, was the happiest I've ever been was winning first Wimbledon.
Navratilova explodes. Eala's Australian Open nightmare ignites a racism scandal. A 24-hour ultimatum rocks the tennis world. Welcome back to Champions Tennis, the only place where we don't just report tennis. We tear back the curtain and expose the chaos, the controversy, and the uncomfortable truths the mainstream would rather ignore. If you're new here, buckle up, because what you're about to hear isn't just another match recap. It's a story about power, perception, and a young star thrown into the fire of global scrutiny. And if you're a returning champion, you already know how we do it. No filters. No fear. Just the truth as it unfolds. Today, we're diving headfirst into a scandal that has left fans furious, legends outraged, and tournament officials scrambling for answers. At the center of it all stands one name echoing across social media timelines and sports talk shows worldwide: Alex Ela. And the question being asked louder by the hour is simple but explosive. Why did this happen? And more importantly, why does it keep happening to players like her? This story begins in Melbourne, but its roots stretch far beyond one tournament or one court. Alex Ela arrived at the Australian Open as one of the most talked about young players in the game. Ranked 49 in the world at just 20 years old, she wasn't some anonymous qualifier hoping to sneak through unnoticed. She was a proven talent, a junior Grand Slam champion, a WTA title holder, and a cultural icon for millions of fans across Southeast Asia. In the Philippines alone, she isn't just an athlete. She's a symbol. A reminder that tennis excellence doesn't belong exclusively to Europe, Australia, or North America. Her rise has been meteoric, and with that rise came expectations, cameras, and crowds. Massive crowds. Everyone knew it. Everyone except, apparently, the Australian Open scheduling team. When the main draw schedule dropped, jaws hit the floor. Ela's first-round match wasn't placed on Rod Laver Arena. It wasn't on Margaret Court Arena. It wasn't even on one of the larger outer courts designed to handle serious foot traffic. Instead, her match was assigned to Court 6. For those who've never been to Melbourne Park, Court 6 is a glorified practice court. Tight seating. Limited access. No real infrastructure for crowd control. It's the kind of court reserved for low-profile early-round matches, not for a player followed by millions. Within minutes, backlash erupted online. Filipino fans, tennis analysts, and even neutral observers were asking the same thing. How could a tournament of this stature make such a glaring miscalculation? The answer arrived in the form of chaos. On match day, hours before the first ball was struck, fans began pouring into Melbourne Park. Not in dozens. Not in hundreds. In waves. Thousands of Filipino supporters showed up draped in flags, faces painted, chanting her name. Some had driven across Australia. Others had flown in from overseas. They weren't there casually. They were there to witness history. But history collided with poor planning. Court 6 reached capacity almost instantly. Security barriers buckled under the pressure of human demand. Lines stretched endlessly, winding through the grounds as fans begged, pleaded, and argued for entry. The noise echoed across the complex. "We want Alex" chants cut through the air, loud enough to distract players warming up on nearby courts. What should have been a celebration turned into a safety nightmare. Security staff were overwhelmed. Extra personnel were called in. Police were alerted. What started as a scheduling decision became a full-blown logistical failure. And as images and videos flooded social media, another narrative began to take shape. Fans weren't just angry. They were suspicious. Because this wasn't just about one court. People started comparing schedules. Lower-ranked players on bigger stages. Lesser-known names given prime slots. And suddenly the conversation shifted from incompetence to intent. The word disrespect trended. Then came the word tennis hates more than any other. Racism. Was this another example of the sport sidelining players from non-traditional tennis nations? Was Ela being treated as an afterthought because she didn't fit the familiar mold of what a star is supposed to look like or where she's supposed to come from? As the debate raged, one voice cut through the noise like a lightning strike. Martina Navratilova, an 18-time Grand Slam champion, a pioneer, a woman whose entire career has been defined by standing up to injustice. According to multiple reports circulating through tennis media, Navratilova did not stay silent. She allegedly called out tournament organizers in blunt terms, asking the question that others were too cautious to voice publicly. Why the racism? Those three words detonated like a bomb. When someone of Navratilova's stature speaks, the sport listens. Her legacy isn't built on controversy chasing. It's built on credibility, on history, on fighting systems that marginalize and exclude. Her reported comments instantly elevated this situation from controversy to crisis. Navratilova's alleged criticism centered on three damning points. First, the complete failure to recognize Ela's global impact. Tennis in 2026 isn't just about rankings. It's about reach, influence, and audience. Ela commands millions of fans, massive engagement, and international attention. Ignoring that isn't just poor planning. It's negligence. Second, the double standard. Navratilova reportedly pointed out that if a player from a Western tennis powerhouse carried even half of Ela's profile, they would never be hidden away on a back court. The implication was uncomfortable but unavoidable. Bias doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through decisions that seem small until their consequences explode. Third, the safety issue. Thousands of fans placed in dangerous conditions because organizers failed to anticipate reality. That isn't just embarrassing. It's irresponsible. The reaction was immediate and divided. Supporters praised Navratilova for her courage. Critics accused her of inflaming tensions. But the genie was out of the bottle. Major outlets picked up the story. Headlines screamed scandal. Social media turned relentless. And within hours, Filipino fan groups and sports advocacy organizations united to issue a 24-hour ultimatum. They demanded an official explanation, a public apology, and accountability. If those demands weren't met, they vowed to escalate the matter to international governing bodies and demand a formal investigation into systemic bias in tournament scheduling. The Australian Open, one of the crown jewels of global tennis, was suddenly facing a legitimacy crisis. And through all of this noise, one person remained at the center of the storm without ever asking to be there. Alex Ela, a 20-year-old athlete preparing for the biggest match of her life, forced to navigate a circus she didn't create. She still had to walk onto court 6. She still had to compete. With thousands of eyes watching, expectations crushing down, and a controversy swirling around her name, she did what champions do. She stepped onto the court. And for a brief, electric moment, it looked like she was about to turn chaos into triumph. When Alex Ela stepped onto court 6, the noise was deafening. This wasn't the polite applause of a first-round Grand Slam crowd. This was raw, emotional, national pride erupting from every corner of that cramped space. Every seat was filled. Every aisle was packed. Fans leaned over railings, pressed against fences, phones raised, voices hoarse before the first point was even played. It felt less like tennis and more like a football derby dropped into the middle of Melbourne Park. For Ela, this was both a blessing and a burden. The energy was intoxicating, but the pressure was immense. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was carrying the weight of an entire country, a controversy, and a global spotlight that burned hotter with every passing second. Across the net stood Alicia Parks, a 23-year-old American known for her explosive power and booming serve. Ranked lower than Ela, but dangerous, unpredictable, and capable of blowing any opponent off the court when her game clicked. On paper, it was a competitive matchup. In reality, it quickly became something else entirely. From the opening games, Ela looked fearless. Her footwork was sharp, her timing immaculate. She took the ball early, redirected pace with ease, and painted the lines with ground strokes that left Park scrambling. The crowd erupted after every winner, the sound bouncing off the surrounding walls, amplifying the intensity to an almost surreal level. Parks looked rattled. Her first serves misfired. Her rhythm vanished. She glanced toward her box, then toward the crowd, visibly unsettled by the constant roar. Ela, feeding off the energy, played with a clarity and aggression that suggested destiny was on her side. Break point converted. Then another. Game after game slipped away from Parks as Ela tightened her grip on the match. Within half an hour, the scoreboard told a shocking story. 6 games to love. A bagel. In her Australian Open main draw debut, Alex Ela had dismantled a top 100 opponent without dropping a single game. The fans exploded. Flags waved wildly. Chants echoed across the complex. This was supposed to be the moment. The answer to every scheduling doubt. Proof that she belonged, that she demanded center stage. But tennis has never been a sport that respects fairy tales. As the second set began, the air subtly shifted. Alicia Parks, to her credit, refused to fold. She stopped chasing perfection and started leaning into her strengths. Bigger serves. Shorter points. Ruthless aggression. Where she had been passive, she now attacked. And as Parks found her range, another problem emerged. The crowd, desperate to help Ela regain momentum, crossed invisible lines. Cheers erupted not just for winners, but for Parks' mistakes. Missed serves were celebrated. Double faults were met with roars. It was emotional, understandable, but against the unwritten code of tennis etiquette. And Parks felt it. Instead of shrinking, she hardened. The jeers sharpened her focus. Later, she would admit the atmosphere was difficult, but also motivating. She stopped trying to silence the crowd and started using their noise as fuel. Her serve began to dominate. Her forehand flattened out, driving Ela further behind the baseline. The rallies shifted. Where Ela had dictated early, she now defended. Parks took the second set 6-3, punching the air as she closed it out. The match was level. The chaos outside the court mirrored the tension inside it. The deciding set was a war of attrition. Ela fought with everything she had. She chased down impossible balls. She saved breakpoints with fearless shot-making. Her heart was undeniable. But the physical toll began to show. Parks' power was relentless, her shots heavier, her intent clearer. Midway through the set, Parks broke serve. It was the crack in the armor she needed. From there, she never looked back. The final score read 6-0, 3-6, 2-6. In just over 90 minutes, Alex Ela's Australian Open dream was over. But that scoreline tells only the barest outline of what happened. This wasn't just a loss. It was the aftermath of organizational failure, emotional overload, and a young player asked to perform under conditions few veterans would envy. Ela walked off court 6 not just defeated, but having endured a spectacle that no first-round player should ever face. And yet, her response spoke volumes. In her post-match interviews, she didn't lash out. She didn't blame the crowd, the court, or the chaos. She thanked her supporters. She called the atmosphere special. She owned the loss with humility beyond her years. Then she did something that cemented her status far beyond rankings. For nearly an hour, under the harsh Australian sun, she stayed. Signing autographs. Taking photos. Hugging crying kids who had waited all day just to see her. She thanked fans personally, one by one. While tournament officials scrambled behind closed doors to manage a public relations disaster, Ela stood there, calm, gracious, and generous. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One side showed confusion and silence. The other showed leadership. As the controversy continued to rage, Ela moved on. Champions don't linger in disappointment. Within days, she boarded a flight to Manila. No press tour. No dramatic statements. Just a quiet return home. But when she landed, it was anything but quiet. She was greeted like a warrior returning from battle. Cameras flashed. Fans cheered. For her country, the Australian Open loss didn't diminish her. It amplified her. Because what people saw wasn't failure. They saw resilience. Waiting for her was the Philippine Women's Open, a historic WTA 125 event marking a new chapter for tennis in the country. This wasn't just another tournament. It was a statement. The first event of its level ever held on Philippine soil. Tickets sold out in record time. Media attention surged. And there was no question who the face of the tournament was. Alex Ela wasn't just entered in the draw. She was the draw. The centerpiece. The reason young kids picked up rackets and dreamed bigger. Seated second, expectations were sky high. This was supposed to be the stage for redemption. A chance to turn frustration into fire. But the tennis gods weren't done writing this story. When the first round draw was released, jaws dropped once again. Ela's opening opponent wasn't a random qualifier. It was a Russian rival who had demolished her 6 years earlier. A match buried in memory. A loss that had lingered quietly in the background of her career. Suddenly, this tournament became more than a homecoming. It became personal. This wasn't just about ranking points or prize money anymore. This was about pride. About proving that the girl underestimated in Melbourne, shoved onto a backcourt, and dragged into controversy was far more than a headline. She was a force. And Manila was about to find out just how dangerous a motivated Alex Ela could be. The moment the draw was released in Manila, everything changed. What was already shaping up to be a celebratory homecoming instantly transformed into a high-stakes reckoning. Alex Ela's first-round opponent wasn't just any name pulled from the bracket. It was a Russian player who had beaten her convincingly 6 years earlier, back when Ela was still a teenager finding her identity on the junior circuit. That loss had been decisive, painful, and formative. It was the kind of defeat that doesn't fade completely, no matter how many wins follow. And now, fate had dragged that memory back into the present, placing it directly in Ela's path at the exact moment she needed redemption the most. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. In Melbourne, Ela had been underestimated, misplaced, and forced to perform amid chaos she didn't create. In Manila, she was being tested immediately, no easing in, no gentle opening round. This was tennis demanding proof. Proof of growth. Proof of resilience. Proof that the player who walked off court 6 in Australia was not defined by that loss, but sharpened by it. Inside the Rizal Memorial Tennis Center, preparations were meticulous. The court was pristine. The stands were packed hours before the gates officially opened. This time, there were no bottlenecks, no security scares, no confused organizers scrambling at the last second. Manila was ready. And most importantly, it was ready for her. When Ela arrived at the venue, the reception was overwhelming. Cheers followed her every step. Young girls wearing replica outfits shouted her name. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders just to catch a glimpse. This wasn't just fandom. This was belief. The kind of belief that wraps itself around an athlete and either lifts them higher or crushes them under expectation. Ela felt it, but she didn't shy away. She smiled. She waved. Then she disappeared into the locker room, shutting out the noise, narrowing her focus. Because for all the emotion surrounding this match, tennis still demanded execution. As match time approached, analysts began to weigh in. On paper, the Russian opponent still posed a threat. Bigger frame. Heavy ground strokes. Experience on slower hard courts. But this wasn't the same Alex Ela from 6 years ago. This version had been forged through international pressure, Grand Slam stages, and now, controversy that tested her composure in ways training never could. Warm-ups told their own story. Ela's footwork was sharp. Her shots carried intent. There was a quiet intensity in her demeanor that signaled something had shifted. This wasn't a player seeking approval. This was a player seeking control. From the first point, the difference was clear. Ela didn't rush. She constructed points patiently, absorbing power and redirecting it with precision. The Russian tried to impose early dominance, stepping inside the baseline, but Ela anticipated it. She varied height, changed pace, and dragged her opponent into uncomfortable positions. The crowd responded, but this time with discipline. Cheers came after points, not during them. It was loud, passionate, but respectful. The kind of environment that fuels rather than disrupts. And Ela fed off it perfectly. Break-point opportunities came early. Unlike Melbourne, where momentum had swung violently, here Ela stayed steady. When she broke serve, she didn't celebrate wildly. She nodded. Focused. Locked in. The first set slipped away from her opponent piece by piece, not through collapse, but through relentless pressure. Ela closed it out with authority. 1 set to love. The demons from 6 years ago began to loosen their grip. The second set tested her resolve. The Russian pushed back, increasing aggression, shortening points, trying to rush Ela into errors. For a moment, echoes of Melbourne flickered. Long rallies. Heavy serves. The match tightened. But this time, Ela responded differently. She didn't retreat. She stepped up. She trusted her training. On breakpoint down, she went after her shots. On crucial rallies, she chose courage over caution. The crowd held its breath, then exploded as she broke serve again. From there, she never let go. When the final ball landed out and the match was over, Ela raised her arms, not in relief, but in affirmation. She had answered the challenge. The win sent a message far beyond Manila. This wasn't just a successful first round. This was a statement that the controversy in Australia hadn't broken her. It had hardened her. As the tournament progressed, the narrative followed her relentlessly. Every match was framed as a response to Melbourne. Every win was labeled redemption. And Ela embraced it without ever saying so explicitly. Her tennis did the talking. Each round, she looked more assured, more commanding, more complete. The home crowd became a constant, respectful roar behind her, a force that lifted rather than distracted. Meanwhile, the fallout from the Australian Open continued to simmer. Tournament organizers eventually released carefully worded statements citing logistical challenges and unexpected crowd interest. But for many, it was too little, too late. The damage had been done. The questions raised by Navratilova and echoed by fans around the world didn't disappear with a press release. They lingered. They forced uncomfortable conversations within tennis circles about representation, market blindness, and how rising stars from outside traditional power centers are treated. Through it all, Alex Ela remained conspicuously silent on accusations and ultimatums. Not because she lacked an opinion, but because she understood something vital. Careers aren't built on outrage alone. They're built on performance, on consistency, on showing, again and again, that you belong exactly where you are. And in Manila, on courts that finally reflected her stature, she showed it. By the time the Philippine Women's Open reached its closing stages, one thing was undeniable. This tournament had become a landmark moment, not just for Ela, but for Filipino tennis as a whole. Young players filled the stands. Local coaches spoke about enrollment spikes at academies. Media coverage extended beyond sports pages into cultural conversations. Ela wasn't just winning matches. She was shifting perception, proving that global tennis doesn't have to orbit the same few nations to thrive. Her Australian Open nightmare would always be part of her story. So would the controversy, the backcourt, the chaos. But it would not be the defining chapter. That distinction now belonged to something else. Resilience, growth, and a homecoming that transformed frustration into fuel. Tennis tried to push her to the margins in Melbourne. Manila pulled her back to the center and reminded the world why she was there in the first place. And as her career continues to rise, one thing is now clear. Alex Ela isn't just surviving the spotlight. She's learning how to command it.